It's Joyce Ripianzi. I'm a partner here at AAFCPAs. I'm in charge of the nonprofit outsourced accounting and fractional CFO practice. And we are excited today for this upcoming hour. We're going to be here with our keynote speaker, who is Philip Deng, and he is the CEO of Grantable, which is a secure AI platform for grants. Welcome, Philip. We're so excited to have you here today with us. Philip got his start in the nonprofit sector, but he has developed an expertise in AI and how it applies to the nonprofit sector. And he's going to be showing us some really great content today. I'd like to note that we encourage a lot of questions. We have a few breaks in his presentation for questions, so please type away, and we'd love to answer those questions for you. So with that, I would like to welcome Philip, and he was going to do a further, more in-depth introduction of himself.
Thanks, Joyce. Really nice to be here. And hi, everybody that I can't see, but please, in the methods that you have available to you, please chime in. I'm really excited to be interactive today. So as was mentioned, I'm Philip Deng. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Grantable, which is the world's leading generative AI grant writing software. If you want to stay in touch, you can use my link tree here. Which is a kind of a cool way that we can stay in touch, and it just kind of gathers all of my key links. So anyway, let's jump into this. As Joyce mentioned, I come from the nonprofit sector, and I like to make that distinction because primarily I speak with nonprofit audiences. I consider myself a nonprofit native. This is a picture of me in the Marshall Islands many years ago, but kind of illustrating my 15 years of experience in the sector on 3 continents, on working in 3 languages at pretty much every level of the organization. And I share that because if you have questions that really go deep into the nonprofit sector, the nitty gritty, please ask them. I mean, that I think is really one of the perspectives that I bring that's different from a lot of people who are speaking about AI right now. And then on the other side, I'm co-founder and CEO of Grantable, which is this generative AI software where you can upload previous grants that you have, and then our AI helps you answer proposal questions using your content, your voice, your statistics, basically being authentic to you and your mission instead of kind of generic. So that experience gives me this really interesting combination where I feel fluent in nonprofit sector culture, and at the same time, I feel that I'm at the leading edge of building with maybe one of the most important technologies that we've had in our lifetime. So it's really quite interesting. So let's go and start with a little bit of an icebreaker, so to speak. I think the poll should be live for all of you. So I'm going to be here for a little while, leave this on the screen. I just want to see where the room is in terms of your familiarity with generative AI. So basic 3 categories here. My apologies if you feel like you fall somewhere in between. But let's just kind of give it a few seconds here and see where people are in the room. Oh, very cool. Hey, that's phenomenal. Let's see. So I'm going to push the result to the audience so that you all can see. Very interesting. This is different from what I've been seeing. There's a slight shift. I would say really, really interesting. So hopefully you're all seeing this. And what I'm seeing is about 60% have no experience at all. Maybe 40%, 35% have tried it a bit, and 5% consider it a reliable part of their toolkit. That's about what I've been seeing. I'd say it's starting to shift a little bit as more people are trying AI. This is really cool. You're all super active, which is amazing. So I'm seeing 230 of you have already done this. So I'm going to push the results one more time just so you can see. I think I'm doing this right, but let me know if not. All right, let's go here. Let's start out with how much do you agree with the following statement on the whole, generative AI will harm my organization and our work. And so we just have kind of a spectrum here from strong agreement to strong disagreement. So I'm going to just talk until we see some results again. Interesting. Vast majority are in, oh, nope, spoke too soon. Okay. So what are we seeing here? As the results roll in, the largest, the plurality are in neither agree, so a neutral stance or a somewhat disagree. Very few people are in the strongly agree. So that's really interesting. We have somewhat agree, strongly disagree. I would say the trend here is from neutral to somewhat positive on AI. So that's super interesting. Now we're over 200 participants. I'm going to push the results to you all, and then we'll go to another one. This is obviously sort of a corollary question. So how much do you agree with the following statement? On the whole, generative AI will benefit my organization. And hopefully without biasing you too much, there's a little bit of obviously it's a yes and type of study that we're doing here. Let's see, when will the results show up? My guess is we're going to be mirroring what we just saw. Okay, so with 145 in, yes, I would say pretty much the mirror. The majority this time are somewhat agree that it will benefit. So this is really interesting. This is really, I think where I come down. Not to bias you too much, but it can do both. I think there are harms and benefits that are very very possible. So it's a little bit of a trick question. Didn't mean to do that to you before lunch, but let's keep rolling. And then this last one is just sort of and I'm not sure how the results will come up. Usually this is a word cloud, but if there are any phrases that come to mind regarding AI and our shared future, go ahead and throw them in there. Let's see what kind of pops up if we get a visualization. Okay, so I see scary, concern, productivity, spooky, collaborative, the matrix. Very cool. Efficiency is popping up. Working together, time saver. This is an incredible audience. So really, really cool. Maybe I'll see if I can share the results with you later, but let's move on for the sake of time. So for the sake of time, here's basically what we'll cover today. We'll start out with a useful knowledge of what is AI and specifically how does generative AI work. I like to do this because I think understanding how this software operates is key to using it both efficiently and safely. We're going to dive deeper into how it's different from traditional software because most of us have a basic understanding of how Google works or video games or software we've grown up with for the last many decades. And I think it's actually useful to understand how this new stuff is a bit different. We'll take a look at the landscape with a bit of a SWOT analysis. We'll take a look at some key concerns that many people have, including privacy, security, and IP. And then we'll really go into a nonprofit focus and try to make this practical for you all. So starting out with artificial intelligence, I like to just set our common definition here. And the first thing to know is that there is no agreed upon definition for AI. If you talk to computer scientists or science fiction writers, or the public, somebody from a kid from school, everybody's going to have kind of a different definition for AI. But the one I think is the best average of what everybody's talking about is that these are machines that are made to be smart like people. So if you encounter technology that's doing something that requires a bit of intelligence that a person might be able to do, you can be pretty safe in assuming that probably there's some AI involved. within that broad category is generative AI, and that's the thing that's got us talking today. Probably a lot of folks have heard of ChatGPT or OpenAI or Anthropic, these different companies that are building this really fascinating new technology that is capable of creating content. Pretty much anything that has been stored in large quantities as digital data. So text, images, video, sound, these models are learning how to create them from scratch. Well, from our prompting at least. So that's what we refer to as generative AI. And you can probably guess that generative describes its creative capacity. So that's what we're talking about today. That's what's really got everybody's attention. So the way that these systems are built is that massive data sets. Really, it's difficult to comprehend how big these training sets are, but really they're on the scale of the internet itself. So I really can't make my mind comprehend how much content, how much text is out there, but that's how much these AI models are being trained on. So vast quantities of text or imagery or audio gets put through these learning algorithms. And what they're doing when they're learning is they're studying the data across hundreds of billions of data points. And they're measuring the data and they're making individually very simple measurements and very simple linkages, but they're doing it at a huge scale, really, really fast. And so the amazing thing that happens over time is that these models pick up patterns and they learn how to predict statistically how to reproduce those patterns. So when you talk with a text model and you put in a prompt, what it's doing is it's translating your text into math, into numbers and probabilities, and then it's adding to the end of that. It's not really answering you in a sense. It's reading what you've put and then considering that whole text and trying to continue what you're writing, which is an answer usually. When it comes to facial or image creation, what they've done is they've studied so many images that pixel by pixel, these things can predict what little point of light should come up next. And once they're finished, miraculously, what appears to us is a really realistic image of a face or a cat or a boat or whatever you've asked it to generate. It's mind bending to really consider the technology that's happening behind the scenes here, how much computing power and data there is. So that's kind of our introductory section here as to how generative AI works. Let me pause for a second, and maybe Joyce, you can also help me to see if there are questions. If not, we can keep going.
So right now, people are just really appreciative of you starting at the basic level, questions about what is generative AI. I think that the one question that pops up here so far is there are a lot of people who don't want their image on the internet because they're afraid of it being exposed. Is there really a way for people to keep themselves out of this arena, or at this point, it's safe to say probably not?
This may be a horses out of the barn type of situation. There's litigation happening, really pretty important litigation happening right now, where folks are suing these companies, pretty much every major media company, lots of authors, publishers, content creators. They're basically saying, hey, you took this data, and it's not like they hacked in, right? Like all this stuff that you can see on the internet, we've never had to consider that you would scrape everything and then put it into some technology that can replicate it. That was not a reality that people had considered. Now it's happened, and we're litigating after the fact to say, was this fair use? And in copyright law, if you use an original work, but you change it enough to create a new original work, that would qualify as fair use and it would be acceptable. It would be legal. There's an argument right now as to whether creating these generative AI models is fair use. And so I think it's going to be really important to see what the outcome of this litigation is, because that will sort of define what kinds of legal avenues that people have. There are some protections you can add to websites or different things like that to keep your image from or your text from being scraped. But I would say at this point, it becomes difficult given how much we interact with one another, how many interviews we do, or this webinar, right? So if this gets posted as some kind of, watch it later video and, it gets exposed. So I really think we are in a new era where we have to both update our policy as well as our cultural norms as to what's acceptable or not. So that's a great question.
Yeah. Another question that came in is, how do we control the bias that's built into these systems? Or do you even think there is bias built in?
There's definitely bias built in, and I think, anything that's created by human beings, we are biased beings. And so I think, to me, awareness and transparency are probably the best precautions we can take. And just to be aware that what we are creating is always going to be a result of the perspectives of the people who created it, the data that's gone into it. I mean, for folks that are listening, most people, most of the imagery that's online is going to be of people who have the access and the privilege of, let's say, having smartphones and having the time and opportunity to snap photos of themselves and put it out there. And then the people that get popular, have their images reproduced the most. And so if you put all of that into an AI model and it starts to learn statistically what do people look like based on the imagery on the internet, it's going to bias or have a preference for the people that are photographed most or have their images replicated the most, which may not, as you have guessed, be representative of the world. And so that's one way to understand what we're talking about as far as bias. But I think, again, everybody's always going to have a slightly different opinion of what is neutrality, what is objectivity. And so I think transparency and understanding what data is going into these models and sort of how are they being tuned to prevent harmful use. If we can all see how, to the best of our ability, how these models are arriving at their results, I think then we can just sort of have that mental context of, okay, this model is behaving in such a way because of the way that it's been constructed and the way that it's been designed or tuned. I don't know if there's a bias free. If somebody says bias free, model, I would be skeptical because, what does that really mean?
Exactly. I think we can move to your next slide then with that.
Awesome. Thanks for those questions. So now that we've got that in our minds, I want to start comparing traditional software and generative AI. And I have here a fortune teller or sort of somebody that reads the future and kind of pulls something out of a crystal ball, and then a reference librarian. And I think those are good, relatable concepts for you to hold in your mind, because generative AI is taking your prompt and then creating something new, just kind of based on probability. It's almost reading its tarot cards of statistics and creating an image or creating a text for you based on what you've asked for. Whereas traditional software is generally you're interacting with the interface and you're referencing some kind of data, some kind of more or less static data. So if you were to say, go to Google and say, what is the difference between ChatGPT and Google? It is going to take your text and then look across ranked websites, web pages, and give you results. And so it is referencing a fixed set of data or fixed information, more or less. It's not creating anything for you, I think, is the big distinction. Whereas if you put the same text into ChatGPT, you're going to get an explanation that is going to sound probably really accurate and really compelling. Maybe like it has been lifted from a great website, but that's not the case. And so that's really the distinction here that I want to get at. You can find very similar information. You can get to a similar result using the two kinds of software, but what's happening is really different. So on ChatGPT or a generative AI model, it is taking that question, breaking it into numbers, and then it is predicting each next fragment of a word that it thinks should come next. And it's creating that faster than the eye can see, but that's how you're getting the result. And it's kind of amazing that it's grammatically correct and oftentimes really well written and thorough, but that's how it's happening. It's not looking through its training data and finding and deciding, this is a good answer to the question, and then bringing it to you. That's not what's happening. And so you really need to kind of start building that that muscle memory in your mind that Google is looking through stuff, whereas generative AI is really spinning it up from scratch. So let's keep going here. So, what are some of the implications of this? I like to do a SWOT analysis. The one that I'm going to highlight here is that I have this blue arrow that maybe could be more effectively highlighting that speed is both a strength and a threat. And it's two sides of the same coin. In one sense, it's intelligence that's giving you this efficiency that you can do something that used to take many minutes or hours in a few seconds. Whereas the speed also causes, well, the opposite of intelligence would be these hallucinations that you may have heard about. So I think it can save us time, just like driving a car is faster than riding a bike or walking. You can get from point A to point B a lot faster. But if you make a mistake riding a bike, you take your eye off the road for a second, you're probably not going to cause too much harm to yourself or someone else. But if you do that in a car that's going much faster, the consequences can be really serious. And it's kind of the same concept with generative AI. Before, it would have been fairly difficult to say, write 100 pages of content in a day, but you can easily do that now. And so the problem is no longer writing that content, it's editing and it's reviewing and ensuring all the stuff that you're producing is accurate and authentic to your use. So I think that's something that's really important to hold in your mind. It's a bit like driving really fast. And so we have to be much more attentive, and it's a different skill set that we need to start cultivating to ensure that we can use it efficiently and safely. One thing I will say, because a lot of people hear the term hallucination, and that sounds like the model is malfunctioning, and it's not. Everything these models do is a hallucination, if you can think about it that way. They are constantly just fabricating from mathematics, from probability. And the real miracle is that it's right so much of the time. The thing that it is wrong, or that it gets something that it says is false, or makes something up, and we think it doesn't line up with reality. That of course is going to happen when you realize how these things work. Every single thing it does, it is doing based on math, based on statistics, not based on reality. And so it really is amazing that so much of what they produce is accurate. The stuff that is inaccurate basically just happens to be where we recognize that there's a bit of a divergence, a bit of difference from what we understand is true, what is real, and a part of the output that doesn't quite line up. So I think I think the term hallucination is here to stay, but just understand that it is not a malfunction. It's not something that I think is going to easily be removed from these systems. I think they're going to get better. And so I think the amount of falsehood or fabrication that doesn't match up with reality is going to shrink. But these systems are working correctly. Everything they produce is a fabrication. And so I think what these companies are trying to do is figure out how they can keep making bigger models that are going to be better and more accurate, more faithful to reality. But just understand that it's not a flaw in the system. It's just the system's working, and some of it doesn't line up with reality. So that's another burst of information. Let me just throw some time here for questions again.
So you bring up the term hallucinate, and one of the things that were pointed out in the comments is that humans hallucinate as well, right? So we embellish and we interpret and can make things up or come to conclusions that other people would disagree with, right? So um, one of the things you and I had talked about is how you have to treat this like another coworker at your
Mm,
organization, right? If someone came to you and said, "Hey, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm thinking," all of that information really still needs to be vetted and edited
hmm
and accepted as your own, as an organization or as a person. What are your
hmm
thoughts on that?
I think that's a wonderful way to help ensure that we are using AI safely. If you can remember that humans are fallible, and you know within reason, anthropomorphize these systems a bit, just understand as a mental model, okay, this is kind of like working with a teammate, and so they are capable of making mistakes just like any of my human teammates are. I think that's a really, really, really good way to add in a safeguard in your mind to double check this work, to understand that that there's a potential for mistakes. And I think, again, just to highlight the difference, if I use a calculator, I am 100% certain that the math I do on the calculator is going to be correct, assuming it's a good calculator. But it never gets it wrong, right? Like it's never going to one time get it wrong. But if I ask a colleague to do some complex math, I might double check the work just to see, because we're people, we might make mistakes, right? And so I think that's a really great way to think about working with AI. We have to recognize it's software, it's digital, just like a calculator, but it's this new kind of software that is capable of making mistakes as well as all kinds of cool creative abilities. So that's a really great question, Joyce. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, and let's also point out that it doesn't contain a calculator, right? So as an accountant, that's the one thing I notice the most. Can you
Yeah,
talk a little bit about how it's looking for facts versus doing calculations versus looking for the most likely answer?
such a good segue. Joyce, I think we should just do all these talks together. Yeah, so it's not doing math in the sense that a calculator is doing math. It's doing an enormous amount of calculation to calculate every pixel or every word, like what should come next. There's a huge amount of computing power behind how you pick what comes in next in a sequence. But it's not doing any sort of 1 plus 1, 8 times 8 type of math like a calculator. And so one of the interesting phenomenon that they're seeing, and I honestly, uh, even the computer scientists that are building these models don't know how this is happening. But in the early models, the smaller models, if you ask a mathematical question, all the model understands is that you've said, what is 8 times 8? It just knows, oh, math is here, numbers are here. The correct thing to put is just an answer with more numbers. Now, as the models are getting bigger, they're getting better at math, which is really, really interesting. And I'm sure people are studying this. But simply by adding more data and more computing power, the accuracy of these models to do more and more complex calculation is improving. But the fact that it's improving, we still want to be really careful, as Joyce was saying, to understand it's a risk. There's no risk when you're using Excel or a calculator that you're going to get an incorrect calculation. There is a risk if you're asking these generative models to do math. And part of that risk is that they may get the answer right many, many times and lull you into a sense of complacency. And then one time, you've asked it to do something important and it's going to get it wrong. So I think that's a really good distinction to kind of draw in on. They can do math, but just be careful. Again, it's like a person. You got to check the math. And I wouldn't generally ask them for how to do math. One thing that might be interesting as a hack, though, and we can start to get into applications, is you might ask the model, how do I do the math to solve a given problem that I have it describe to you the steps that you might do on your own in Excel or with a calculator to figure out a particular problem that you're working on. You do the math, use mathematical calculating tools that are meant for that, but you can use these tools to help you teach the process to arrive at the figure that you want, maybe if you don't know how. So that's really kind of how to start thinking about these models as helpers.
Excellent. Why don't we continue with the slides?
Sounds good. Okay, so let's talk about data security, which is something that a lot of people ask me about. I've divided this into kind of the traditional versus what's new. So on the bottom, and apologies, my slide's a little bit altered here, but I think you can get the idea. You have the interface, that's where you interact with an AI model. You have the model itself, and then you have the training, which happens before these models are released. So months and months before the companies train the models, and then they share them with the public. So what you want to make sure is that everything is hosted securely. That's the same as it's been for years now. You want to make sure that the companies that are have the data centers and the servers and the interface, your login, all that stuff, make sure that's industry standard. And for now, the big models are hosted by companies like Microsoft and Amazon. So you can be pretty sure that in traditional sense of cybersecurity, that it's the best that the world has right now. So that's good. The one part you want to be careful about is training data. So particularly, I think the way to remember this is if the product you're using is free, I mean, check the license agreement or the terms of service that you've agreed to, because probably what's happened, as in the case of the free Chat GPT, they allow for your interaction and your content to be used in training or product improvement unless you opt out. If you pay for it, then the default is not to use your data or your activity. And my company, Grantable, which is built on GPT, we go through sort of a business or a B2B door. And again, that data is also not used for training or product improvement. Now, even if your data went into a training data set, remember, the data set is at the scale of the internet. So even then, I would say it's a best practice not to put sensitive information into free models. But just if you have done that and you're starting to sweat in your seat, at the same time, it really is, whatever that one document or one sentence or paragraph that you put into the internet's worth of data, which gets ingested and mixed together, it's pretty unlikely that your stuff is going to pop out again. So just understanding how that stuff works, still a best practice, still pay attention in terms of service. But again, it's not referencing that material like Google or something like that. So another thing that people ask me about, especially in the nonprofit context, is about plagiarism. So is it okay to use the content that's being written? And I think the way to think about it is, what we're basically seeing is an evolution of spell check. And so probably lots of folks here use something like Grammarly, which can rewrite your writing to tune it in different ways, to improve it. So if you're using that, which I think a lot of people have, and it hasn't really caused an uproar, what's the difference now? I think that's the question, is where are we drawing the line? So I don't think it's going to be practical, actually, to figure out, when can you use AI, when can't you? Especially because companies like Google and Microsoft are embedding this stuff into Word, into Google Docs, into the places where people do their creative work. So I think what we're going to have to do is really get back to the values behind plagiarism rules, which is we want to understand where our ideas come from and faithfully credit other people when the ideas are not ours, and not take intellectual property and misrepresent it. So I don't think we're getting to the point where we have to just cite line by line, where AI was used and where it wasn't. Maybe it'll be the case that people want to put a little disclaimer that says, hey, this was written with help using AI. That could be something we develop as a cultural norm, or that some institutions will ask for. I think that's fine. I do that sometimes when I'm working with AI, and I just want people to know, hey, this was written with AI help. But I think the main thing is to understand where our ideas come from, and if they're not our own, to say so. So let me just pause once more for questions there, since we're kind of really diving in now.
So you had talked about the data sets and how it goes into the system, ChatGPT or whatever system you're using. So one of the questions was, I asked it a question and it gave me what I believe is a wrong answer. So can you talk a little bit about how it's meant to be interactive and how you can engage when you receive something that you think is a wrong answer?
Well, you can call it out, honestly. You can say, hey, my understanding is XYZ, and it probably, most of these models have been tuned to be extremely agreeable. And so it'll probably say, oh, you're right, I'm so sorry. And then it'll kind of refine itself to be more in line with your understanding. Now, I mean, I think this kind of gets to one of my recommendations, which is to be playful, to experiment with generative AI in the way that we play. And think back to childhood. Sometimes we do pretty risky things for fun, and yet, if you see kids playing, if you see, even adults doing, mountain biking or running or swimming, our senses are actually quite alive and quite attuned to our surroundings, because we understand that we're moving quickly or there are risks inherent in what we're doing. So I say adopt that stance and then have some fun with these models. Talk with one about something that you know a ton about, and kind of try to find where it's inaccurate, and then maybe try to trick it. Try to say, you know what, I actually know for a fact that the earth is flat, and see what it does. See if it kind of pushes back on you and says, oh, really? I mean, my understanding is that it's round. Try to push it, try to trick it, try to get it to agree with you. And what you'll learn in that interaction is, oh my gosh, like this thing will tell me kind of anything I want to hear. And in that case, treat it like somebody, like a person. To kind of go back to that heuristic, go back to saying, okay, well, this is like a person who'll tell me anything I want to hear. So maybe when I need to feel good, I'll talk to this person. But if I really need to know kind of the honest assessment of what I'm doing, maybe this isn't the I should find a real person that I trust to give me the unvarnished truth. So I think that's a great way to kind of go in there, and if you know the answer is false, press it and understand the limits or the feel of working with one of these models. That's a great question.
Great. We do have a question here about Grantable. And,
Okay.
do you think you have less hallucinations because of the way your software is drawing upon information, or do you think it's the same as one of the other models? But you might want to tell people a little bit more about Grantable and what it's used for in the nonprofit sector.
Yeah, I'm gonna demo it in just a few minutes here, but just we'll bookmark that. But yes, the answer is that the reason that I chose to pursue grant writing specifically as a use case for generative AI is because many of the folks here who write grants know that a lot of times you're just recycling the information across different funders, and that can be actually one of the most painful aspects of pursuing funding. And so what we're doing is not relying on so much the creative abilities of GPT. We're relying on its ability to rework or recombine your source material to answer different questions. So it's essentially, it's based on an understanding of how real human grant writers work, which is generally, once you have some proposals written, you come to a question you've answered before and you say, oh, I know that I want to use this paragraph from a previous proposal and this paragraph, and I want to recombine them to answer this question. That's what generative AI is exceptionally good at doing. So just pull those two paragraphs and say, answer this question, and it will, thoroughly, point by point, within word limits, draft you a response that then you can edit and refine the way that you want. So that's why we chose this area of work, because we recognize that there's really important mission-driven work out in the world that is being hindered because you're all working on these stupid word counts and trying to massage the text to, like, there's better things you could be doing with your time. And so that's why we focused there.
So we have a bit of an opinion question. Do you think that this diminishes our creativity, or does it expand it? And maybe you can work that into your next segment.
I'm training myself to say yes, and it's much more nuanced. If you ever find yourself trying to fit AI into a black and white box, is this good or bad? Try to train yourself to say yes. Like, it's probably good and it's probably bad. So can it diminish your creativity? Absolutely. If you use this thing in the wrong way, it can definitely kind of bring you down, and probably make you a little bit lazy. But can it also augment your creativity? Absolutely. When I write my blog, which is called The Process, and you can find it on the link tree as well, I don't use AI. I've tried, and maybe in a paragraph here or something, it's helped me out, but I generally find that it inhibits my creative process when what I'm trying to do is really come up with new ideas to share with people. And so what I use it for, though, at the end, is I'll put the whole thing in and say, hey, give me 10 titles and subtitles that I could call this thing. Because by the end of writing, I'm so tired and I don't know how to add a title. And so then what I generally do is I look at all the suggestions, and I'm generally not taking one of them verbatim, but a few fragments of the different titles it's given are enough to kind of spark my own sensibility, and I say, okay, thank you so much. Here's my title, and I publish the work. Now that's maybe not a great example for augmenting creativity, but that's how I use it. I think at the end of the day, if it can kind of save you time and energy from things that are not creative or anti-creative, that are really just sapping your drive and your joy, and you use AI to do that, you can generally repurpose that time and energy into your creative work. And so I think that's really the direction that you need to pay attention to. Are you short circuiting the hard work of being creative? Then you're going to diminish your ability. Otherwise, if you're injecting more time and energy into your creative process, then you're actually augmenting your creative process. So let's talk about some of the practical use cases, since we're kind of on that topic. Scaffolding and brainstorming. So I have some very tiny text, I'm sorry, but some practical examples of scaffolding and brainstorming. Let's say you're an ED, you've got a keynote address coming up, kind of what you want to talk about. You could put those into a model and say, hey, will you come up with an outline for 30 minutes of remarks? And it can come up with some ideas for how you might weave together concepts, and then you can go and write the remarks. I wouldn't suggest that you ask it to write the thing, because it probably won't sound like you, but at least giving you an idea, a roadmap, is really cool, and then that allows you to find your way. Some other things like summarization, be careful again, check your work if you ask it to pull out key points for you. Role playing is really fun. Sometimes I create AI focus groups. So you could take a piece of writing and you could ask an AI to assume, say, 5 different identities of people that might be in your audience. And then you can say, hey, everybody, give me your feedback on this. And you'll get opinions, from this AI model, but representing these different perspectives, and that can just be kind of cool for you to consider your work from different angles in a way that you might not have been able to before. AI editing, that's basically your Grammarly use case. Graphic design, check out these images. I think AI imagery is actually going to become a pretty sticky issue for society to work through. They're getting really good at creating some specific types of images, like faces and stuff like that. So I haven't found that it's great for, like, replacing the imagery of your organization yet, but stay tuned, because I think it's technology that's getting very good, and so at some point I think people are just going to have to learn how to use it. Voiceover is kind of cool. There are publicly available AI voices that sound better and better. They really read with inflection, and they can even, you can train your own voice, and you can have an AI version of your voice narrating things. So that's just some ideas for how to broadly think about what you can do. This is a little concept that I'm coming up with and sharing, which is Beth Cantor and Allison Fine. They're authors of The Smart Nonprofit, and they have a concept called the dividend of time, which is basically the time you save using tools. And in particular, I kind of built upon that and said, one of the things that I think is going to be an issue in the next few years here is that the more that we are interacting with AI, or the more that AI is coming between us as an intermediary, we really need to think about building and maintaining trust between each other. And so one of the things that I think is a really good little thing to tuck into your mind is, if we use AI to save time, and then we dedicate some of our time to building trust, I think that's going to serve most organizations really, really well. And that means building trust between your internal team, but also the stakeholders in your community. So if you just use AI to save time, and then you use that time to be more productive, and then you use AI to save more time, and then produce, I think in the short term, you may see a bump in sort of your achievement or your goals. But one of the things that we never had to do before, prior to the internet, was to, build time to see each other and to talk with one another. But as machines are capable of doing more and more of that work for us, I think we actually have to learn how to go out of our ways to build trust and spend time working with one another in person, or at least, digitally in person. So just tuck that away, that some of your time that you save really should be going towards trust building. So I've got some trends that I'd like to share with you really quickly. Joyce, we're still okay? I see 10 minutes left. Is that right?
Yes, that is
Okay.
correct.
So
Yep.
So AI is going to move really fast. And what I mean by that is, it's going to get better quickly, and it's going to get out quickly. Every one of us has a little computer that's in our pockets. We're on screens all day. When one of these companies releases a new AI model, it usually, at least for the last few iterations, has incredible new abilities. It gets much, much better at doing what it does, and it's instantly available to anyone with an internet connection. So just remember that it's different from, maybe the early 2000s, where some people still needed to buy a computer, or to get high-speed internet, or to download the right software. It's now more or less instantaneous when they push these things, which leads to the AI will be everywhere. It's going to be in our devices pretty soon. These models are getting smaller, and I fully expect that the future phones that you buy are going to come with your own AI model on board. It's going to do things for you within your phone and within your apps. Something for nonprofits to pay attention to is the increase in inequity. I think that AI is going to create more inequity, at least in the short term, and disruption as well. There are reports that a lot of economic disruption is possible if we reach a certain threshold of AI capability. Now, I actually think nonprofit jobs are going to be somewhat more resilient because of the different operating model. I'm actually working on a book about this subject, so hopefully I finish that in the next few months. Stay tuned. But I think the sector that people here represent is going to be incredibly important. I don't think the nonprofit sector has experienced its era yet, its heyday, and I think it's coming, and it may be a result, or AI may be a catalyst. So stay tuned. And as I said in the last slide, trust is super important. Very quickly, I published an article with Beth Cantor and Allison Fine in the Stanford Social Innovation Review with 8 tips for nonprofits. So that's also linked in my link tree, so I won't hover too long here. But again, something to just, it's a step-by-step process. Be knowledgeable and informed, address the emotions of your team. It talks about staying human-centered and using data safely. And then also how to think about risks and bias, and then specifically figuring out how it can help you, not just sort of, let's throw some AI at it. Then testing, which we've also talked about. So using it as in like a playful sense with non-mission critical work just for yourself, well before you potentially roll it out publicly or with your clients or the people you serve. And then just thinking about how it's going to shape our workplace. So with that, let me do a quick screen share here. And I'm going to share Grantable. So this is just a really quick demo of what our software does. So in this document here, this is basically, it's a grant proposal that I redid. It's a real proposal, but I anonymized with a fictional environmental justice organization. And so you just upload your previous grant proposals, and then you upload a new one that you're working on. So this is a real HHS Challenge Award grant. And so what you can do is come and find a place where it's asking a question. Let's see, where are the questions actually? Okay, so here we go. Let's say here, to what extent is the proposed solution directly informed by communities? So what you do is highlight it, you press Command J, and Grantable looks through your system and finds a snippet from a previous proposal that's relevant to answering it. So let's just see, you can tell it all kinds of things. You can select which specific paragraphs or sentences or things to use, but I'm just going to do the shortcut and see what it does. So I'm just going to say answer this. And so what it's done is it's used the existing proposal to specifically answer this question. And then what you can do is just say insert below. If you think, okay, I don't need this last sentence, you can edit it just like you would a normal document. You can also highlight it and again bring up your thing, and you could say, shorten this, and it'll come down. You could say shorten this to 20 words, and we'll see what it does. So it does that, and you can replace the section. So it's different from how you might have interacted with these models where you're constantly chatting and saying, oh, can you change this word? It lets you just be a writer with the power of AI and with your entire library as like a smart content source library. So it's helping you look through your stuff for things that are relevant to the question you're answering, but it also gives you really finite control. So if I do Command J again and I click open this source material, you can see what it's pulling. You can highlight a section and say, oh, I actually just want you to use this section. And then you just do Command C, like copy, and that grabs that section. And then so I can say, just use this section to address, this question. And then I can say, answer this. And it's going to use that particular racial equity statement in that case, which actually happens to be pretty good for that. And then you can insert that section below. So that's how you can save a ton of time using Grantable for grant seeking. You really can draft proposals in a few minutes now. But again, make sure you've got human oversight. And so that's sort of the end of my scripted remarks. And I know we're just here in time, so I'm glad we had some questions during. If you do happen to want to take this back to your organizations, we wanted to give you a gift to thank you for sharing the time with me. If you use the code AAFCPA24, you can get a month free for our starter tier, and just try it out to your heart's content, see if it's helpful for your organizations. And then hopefully we kind of landed at the right time here, Joyce.
Yeah. Well,
I don't have a hard stop, but I know the programming must continue.
we do. And thank you so much for offering that discount code. That is wonderful. I'm sure many people will take advantage of it. In just the few minutes we have left, is there any advice you could give nonprofits that might help them decrease the inequity that you think might be coming?
In terms of social inequity, or
the use of technology? Like, what comes to mind for me is doing, training and education with their constituency to help people diminish that impact of inequity that can be created by new technology being introduced and people not being on the forefront of it.
I think one of the things that is it's a chicken and the egg kind of question, and I think it really comes back down to time. I would say the biggest inequity that I see between wealthy organizations and ones with fewer resources is time. And so people will say, I just don't have the time or a person to dedicate to learning this technology to share with the team. I don't know how individually you can kind of get beyond that, but I will just say, if you make the time to learn about this technology, I think this is transformative. I think it's really important. It's on a scale of transformation that I don't think we've seen in many decades. So this is really kind of world shaping stuff. And if you do find the time, it is a software unlike any that can teach you how to use it. So you can actually talk to the software and ask it for tips, which you sometimes have to check. But the way that you learn it is different from anything that we've ever interacted with. So I think it will save you time. I think the learning curve is not as steep as some of the stuff that's been built for nonprofits in the past. And I really do think that within a few hours of playing around with this stuff, you start to see how it can save you vastly more time, and help you build your capacity in ways that are super important. So I just think it's a worthy investment, but I don't have any secret advice for how you find more hours in the day. And I'm really sorry about that.
Well, we are grateful that you joined us here today. And I thank you for being here.